The topic this morning is emotional intelligence. We'll do it in two parts. It's one of the most amazing things that I've ever learned. And I hope that by the time we're done, you think it's pretty amazing. Because if you implement the information, your life will change. You will have far more ability to be successful by design. To talk about this, we really do have to do it in two parts, because emotional intelligence is not emotions. But emotional intelligence manages and moderates emotions in conjunction with your brain. So anybody read 10 minutes aloud yet this morning? Oh, hallelujah. Several of you did. Oh, I'm just so pleased. So the rest of you will try to get that in this morning. All right, read with me. The process of raising your emotional intelligence can be jump-started when you understand the difference between emotions and feelings, two biochemically different states, and are committed to managing both appropriately. So, do you realize that emotions and feelings now follow different pathways in the brain? They're two biochemically different states, meaning your brain and body has a different chemical structure depending on which of those you are involved with. And unfortunately, at least in the English language, we pretty much use those terms interchangeably. And we did not know that there was a difference. Thank you, Doc. So emotions are fast-acting. Look, isn't that beautiful? They're fast-acting cellular signals that are triggered by an internal or an external source. So you can trigger your own emotions, or something can happen in the outside world that triggers your emotions. That's one of the problems with not being really, really careful what you put into your brain. So you stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching, really scary movies. That's gone directly into long-term memory, because anything that comes to you with two or more sensory systems and an emotion tends to bypass the switching mechanism and go directly into long-term memory. So you're watching something that's really scary, go to sleep, wake up a couple hours later in a cold sweat, screaming, terrified. The emotion of fear has been triggered internally, but because of what you saw externally that you put into your brain. Have I said that in a way that makes sense? Okay. Now, what are emotions for? Some people have said, boy, if I didn't even have to worry about emotions, it's a little bit like stress. I'd be so well off. I'd say, no, you wouldn't. Emotions are what give you energy and movement and push you towards your goals. So what are they designed to do? At least 4 things. Get your attention. Once they get your attention, they want to give you information. But since your body is really your subconscious mind, they have to get your attention, move the information up to your conscious third part of the brain so that you can understand what they're trying to tell you and make some decisions based on that. So as Candace Pert says, emotions really connect the conscious mind with the subconscious mind. And they give you energy to take action. Probably should put appropriate action. They give you energy to take action, period. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it isn't, but the preferred is, of course, appropriate. So there's no emotion center, per se, in the brain. But in this second brain layer, when you pull the layers apart so that you can see that there are 3 functional layers. The first one's called the reptilian layer, because that's all reptiles have. The second layer is called the mammalian layer, and mammals have that, so of course we do because we're mammals. And then that third layer is the neocortex, or the cerebrum, or gray matter, And some animals have parts of that, but they're not believed to have this prefrontal cortex right here, right behind your forehead. So remember that. That makes us uniquely human, and we'll talk about that. So when an emotion surfaces, it's going to surface in this middle layer, probably first, because that's where emotional impulses are believed to arise, and then they spread rapidly. But they're also going to arise simultaneously in cells throughout the rest of your brain and body, because it becomes a universal response, if you will, when an emotion arises, and that's why they're so powerful. When you're in the grip of a strong emotion, you are in what researchers call it a biochemically altered state. And some of that can be good, and some of that not so good. And according to Joseph Ledoux in The Emotional Brain, emotional processes operate at a much higher speed than thoughts, and often bypass the mind's linear reasoning process entirely. And that's the reason when you're watching or listening to things that involve two senses, seeing and hearing, for example, and an emotion, it can bypass conscious choice and go straight into long-term memory. This middle layer is believed to be something like 80,000 times faster than the top layer, conscious thought. So no wonder when an emotion surfaces, unless you're very emotionally intelligent and have practiced dealing with this, it can take you over in a nanosecond. And you can engage in some action or behavior that when you wake up the next morning, you go, what did I do that for? Now look at what I'm going to have to do to clean that mess up. Because it can happen so quickly. Dr. Pert was a researcher. She died not too long ago. I love her work. She was a researcher at the National Institutes of Health in the United States, and she was the individual who led the team that first found opiate receptors in the brain. Those little docking stations on cells where you take an opiate and it binds with those receptor molecules and influences your brain. So read with me. When in the grip of a strong emotion, you are in a biochemically altered state. Both the brain and body are part of the subconscious, faithfully recording and reporting chemical processes that enter our conscious awareness only as we recognize them as emotions. And that's the part where we believe they connect the subconscious with the conscious. Each emotion comes with differing gestures, postures, behavioral patterns, memories, and facial expressions. They create physiological markers that involve a wide range of bodily changes. So ask yourself, when you're in the grip of a really strong emotion, it really doesn't matter which one, what kind of physiological changes are you aware of in your body? What happens? Well, your heart might beat faster. You might perspire. You might turn red, blush. Blood pressure may go up or go down. You may breathe faster. You may breathe more slowly. Sometimes you cry. Sometimes you'll get butterflies in your stomach. You know that feeling? Sometimes you'll have to go to the bathroom really quickly. Could you what? You could shut down and go to sleep. That would be usually part of a conserve withdraw response to a stressor, but not necessarily in response just to the emotion, although it could be if the emotion is fear and it's bad enough. So there's lots of different markers, And they differ in different people based on the different types of emotion. But the bottom line is this: when in the grip of a strong emotion, your physiology is going to change. And that can have any number of consequences. So is this positive or negative? It depends. So read with me. Without an energy source, a clock would be motionless. Humans would be motionless without emotions to give them information and energy. All emotions are positive, and some are also protective. Each is designed to help you manage specific situations appropriately. Did you know that all emotions are positive? Did you grow up being taught that all emotions are positive? I sure didn't. What's negative is not the emotion. What's negative are the feelings and behaviors related to them that are often mismanaged. Problem is, like a lot of other things, we learn how to deal with emotions and feelings in childhood. And if you had parents and caregivers and teachers who knew how to do this effectively, then you had the opportunity to learn those skills. You might not have chosen to do so, but you had the opportunity to do so. But you can only teach what you know. So if you didn't know that, if your parents and caregivers and teachers didn't know that, they couldn't teach you. So many of us have grown up very handicapped with what we now know about emotions and feelings because we didn't have good role models or anyone to help us learn how to manage them. I only talk about 4 core emotions. And that's because at least joy, anger, fear, and sadness, those 4, are inborn. We believe that they're inborn in the human brain because you can see them on the face of the fetus during gestation, depending what's happening to the mother if you do a fetal scan. So that's pretty amazing, that depending on what's happening to the mother, that's being transmitted to the fetus, and those facial expressions can change. If the mother's happy, that's one thing. If the mother's terrified because she's being abused or running for her life in a war zone, that can be a problem. So this is what we call the emotion staircase, and it shows the 4 core emotions, also euphoria and apathy, although apathy isn't an emotion, and we'll talk about each of those. So hopefully you can build into your brain the reason that we have each of these. So since all emotions, strong emotions, tend to trigger the same type of physiological changes, you have to now, when you feel your body's changing, when you sense that something's different, ask yourself, is an emotion arising? And based on what just happened or what's going on now or what I'm facing, which would likely be the appropriate emotion? And you can learn to very quickly identify that. So let's start with joy, because it's the only emotion that has no negative outcomes when maintained over time. And that's just amazing. So again, you go back to Scripture, and it talks about always being positive. That's a form of joy, contented joy. We're not talking about, flying off the ceiling with a dose of something or other. We're talking about just calm joy that has no negative consequences when maintained over time. And the other 3 protective emotions are given to us to use appropriately depending on what's going on in the environment. But they'll have negative consequences if we maintain them over time. Some researchers define this as a natural state of anti-depression hardwired into the brain. I like that. Without joy, you may be unable to become the balanced, contented, productive individual you were intended to be, because that's how the brain works best. And because the brain loves congruence, when you're living in a state of joy, it's pulling memories from throughout your brain about other times when you felt joyful, and you feel better and better and better. Pseudo or false joy, don't really know what real joy is like, but you're trying to feel better somehow, can lead to addictions, obsessions, compulsions, a sense of unreality, frustration, and even depression. So it's really important to know what real joy is and to embrace that. So let's talk just a little bit about euphoria. It's shown as the step up from joy, but it's not meant for you to teeter on this top step. You pop up to euphoria once in a while for a few seconds, just intense joy. Maybe you see a double rainbow. Maybe you have 117 candles on your birthday cake. You know, whatever it is, but you don't stay there. And people who don't understand this will try to stay at euphoria, and the only way you can do that is with some type of addictive process. And so when people don't understand the difference between joy and this brief bump up to a few seconds of intense joy, they can try to straight line this. And it doesn't work very well for the brain. The brain was not designed to live at euphoria. Hardcore addicts who are trying to do so, the average lifespan is something like 37 years. I'm aiming for 122. There's a little difference there. If you cannot bump up to euphoria, then you might miss those really special times where you just feel wonderful. But again, if it's unmanaged, then you're going to continue to look for something that gives you this high euphoric feeling, and that can be anything. Tobacco smoking can give that to you when you take your first puff and you've been on the plane for 14 hours and couldn't smoke. It can be almost anything for your brain, because you teach your brain what's really wonderful. Anything that directly or indirectly self-medicates your brain is the way the researchers talk about it. Trigger the brain reward system. You can become addicted to, and that can be, as I said, anything from substances to foods to sex to gambling to you name it. So anger is the first step down from joy, and anger is given to us so that we can quickly understand when our boundaries have been invaded. Somebody's invaded our boundaries. And hopefully you all have good, balanced personal boundaries. It's a container for yourself, separates you from others, contains your decisions about morality and about interpersonal relationships and sexuality and spirituality and all kinds of things. When the emotion of anger arises because somebody is invading your boundaries, it not only helps you go back and look at your personal limits, the fence you have around yourself, with a gate so you can let people in and you can go out, but you know what your boundaries are, just like your property boundaries. And it gives you energy. Gives you energy to restructure them, to step back, to shut the gate, all kinds of things. Without anger, you may lack the motivation and energy to take appropriate corrective action, because it gives you energy to do that. You may become complacent and begin to tolerate the intolerable, and we see this over and over again in shelter situations where males are battered as well, but more females are battered than males. So you have a female, she's being battered, bust her bones up, gets all bruised, put her in the recovery center. 3 months later, she's healed, but she doesn't know how to deal with anger. And so she goes right back into the situation and begins to tolerate, again, something that's really intolerable. So anger is key to understanding boundaries. And when it's unmanaged, oh my goodness, all kinds of problems, from ulcers to you name it. Second step down from joy is fear. Fear is different from anger. Fear tells you when you were in actual danger for some reason. And it gives you energy to do whatever you need to take care of yourself and take care of the people that you love, especially, little kids that can't take care of themselves. So if you cannot go to fear, you likely can't protect yourself or the people that you're responsible for. Imagined fear is what most people deal with. I mean, there's not a lot of things that I really fear in this life, but there are a lot of imagined fears that people visualize, picture in their brains that can trigger fear, and that's unhelpful. And you need to understand what's real and what's imaginary. When fear is unmanaged, you can get writer's block, artist's block, can't come up with new ideas, feel less confident. That's where you can develop phobias, especially in that middle mammalian layer. And you can become immobile from fear. And some people fall asleep into that conserve withdraw response. Sadness is the fourth on the emotional staircase, and it's designed to alert you that you've experienced some kind of loss. Unfortunately, we often interpret loss way too narrowly, and we only think of it in terms of death. There's all kinds of losses. You wanted somebody to ask you out to the high school prom, and they don't. Or you want to get into a specific school, and you don't. Or your goldfish dies. Or your dog's run over by a car. Or your parents get divorced, and you've lost that, healthy, functional two-parent home setting, which you probably they wouldn't divorce if it had been healthy and functional, so you're losing it either way. It gives you energy to grieve your losses, heal the woundedness, and recover. If you can't go to sadness, you're not going to be able to do that well. It's not about shedding tears. Remember, we talked about my face is a clock, the 4 chunks of cerebral tissue. This right frontal lobe, the envisioning part of the brain, no language up there. I mentioned that yesterday. There's gestures. I won't demonstrate some of them. There's looking at the big picture. There's intuition. And in the gesture part, and that's also where most inventions come from. The gestures part, tears is a gesture of deep emotion. So you may have 100 people and something happens that is very, very sad and is a loss. Some people will burst into tears really easily, males and females, although males try to suppress it, unfortunately, because that's how they've been socialized. But many of them are going to be completely dry-eyed, but that doesn't mean they're not feeling just as deeply, sensing the emotion just as deeply. It's that they're in a different part of the brain that doesn't gesture emotion through tears. So we need to be careful about saying to somebody, until you cry about this, you won't heal. That's ridiculous. And if you have the type of brain that tears up easily, let yourself do it, because that is the way your brain expresses deep emotion. If you don't manage it right, it can suppress your immune system, decrease levels of serotonin, lead you further down the path toward depression, and to immobility or even apathy. So what does that mean? Apathy is not an emotion, but it's the state that people often get to when they don't know how to manage their emotions and they get overwhelmed. People rarely commit suicide when they're at apathy. They don't have the energy. So the years I worked with mental health programs, when people were at apathy, not a problem. I mean, they're apathetic. They're just sitting there. But you don't have to worry about them killing themselves. Don't have the energy. But as they start to heal, address their sadness, move up to, I'm afraid it's going to happen again. What do I do about that? Move up to anger. It shouldn't have happened. It's not fair. That's when you really have to start watching them, because they're getting enough energy. And that's the point at which they may say, you know, I'm out of here. Now, back to Candace Pert. She says a specific neuropeptide may be associated with each emotion so that you can only experience one core emotion at a time. And it looks like she was absolutely on the money, as we used to say in Canada. You can experience different emotions rapidly, but probably only one at a time. That's also kind of helpful because you can more easily identify which one is happening. Now, let me give you my favorite metaphor that's changed the way I look at emotions. So I'm standing on a little stage here. You have a stage in your brain. I don't know what your stage looks like. I can tell you what mine looks like. Anytime I build something in my brain, you know, money's no object. So I have just fabulous looking things built in my brain. My stage is about the size of this front part, only it's a semicircle and it's got about 4 steps up. It's made of really, really expensive Carrara marble. It's got a door at each side that opens into a wing. And on either side of the door are beautiful Corinthian pillars, gold-plated with 24-karat gold. I mean, there's no point in having anything but the best, right? Now, I am on my stage my entire life. Until I die, I'm always on the stage of my brain. There is also one assistant with me at all times. I've got 4 special assistants: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. So dress them up in your brain however you want to dress them up so you recognize them instantly. The one I want with me on stage all the time, unless there's some specific type of situation I have to deal with, is joy. So I picture myself on stage and joy is always right here with me. The other 3 protective emotions are in the wings. So joy is out here with me and anger, fear, and sadness are in the wings. Nothing moves joy off this stage unless something occurs in the environment to trigger one of the 3 protective emotions, or I trigger it myself because of something that's real or just something that's imagined. So I told you yesterday about the woman who came up to me and said, "When are you going to get a facelift?" Which I've been chuckling about for the last 10 years. If she saw me now, I don't know what she'd say. I've got this English-Irish skin, you know, that's paper parchment thin. So I've got joy here, and I'm not very actualized and differentiated, if you want to use those terms. So somebody comes up to me and says, "When are you going to get a facelift?" Immediately I'm punched with an emotion. And it could be anger. The nerve! What in the world were they thinking? Joy goes into the wings, anger comes out on the stage with me. And because the brain likes congruence, as soon as anger's out here, it begins to, with its hippocampus search engine, look for all the other times in my life when I experienced anger. And it's just sticking here like glue. The minute I say to myself, wait a minute, there's no need to get upset about this. That's just her brain's opinion. I mean, take a pout or laugh about it. Anger has to go back, and here comes joy. Or let's say I immediately got fearful, not angry. I said, ooh, I wonder if I really do look that bad. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have this recorded. Out comes fear. Joy goes into the wings. As soon as I say, wait a minute, we all get wrinkles. It's just a map of where I've been in my life. Not a problem. Fear goes back into the wings. Out comes joy. But supposing that I get very sad, which actually is probably what I would have done years ago, because I was born into a family with a mother who was just very, very beautiful. Irish-French mix, flawless skin, thick black hair, curly. I mean, a very, very pretty woman. I don't look like my mother, I look like my dad. He wasn't a dog, but he wasn't as handsome as for a man as she was beautiful for a female. So I grew up, having people always compare me to my mother. I remember one time we were walking through a little town, and I was dawdling behind her as usual, looking at, I don't know, the birds and the bees and the ants on the whatever. And I heard somebody stop and talk to her. People often did that because they liked the way she looked. And then they noticed, X number of feet behind, this little waif. Now, my mother had been left in an orphanage when she was 5, and children can't raise children. And the tendency for people who are very, very good looking is to try to stay really good looking because that's how they get their strokes. And every brain needs strokes. This is not a negative. But often when that happens, they don't build their other personal characteristics that will eventually compensate when, they get some wrinkles. So I heard the lady say, who's the little girl behind you? And, she was probably didn't spend as much time on me as she did on looking good herself, which again is just where she was in life. And I probably had one shoe off and one shoe on, and a bib that had, a couple mornings worth of breakfast dribbled on it because I tended to drop everything I touch. And my hair probably combed with an egg beater, and my little flour sack dress with the hem down on one side and little cotton panties hanging down around my knees. And I've got pictures like that. It's a hoot. So he says, who's that little girl? She looked around. She says, oh, that's my daughter. Really? She doesn't look like you. I know, she looks like her father. So by the time I'm 5, what do I know? I'm ugly as sin. Because what do kids know? Only what they hear and what they're told. And I didn't have any idea that it's fine to look like my father. I just knew I didn't look like my mother. So supposing I hadn't worked through that stuff and this lady comes up to me and says, when are you going to get a facelift? I could go clear to sadness. Because I have a loss of looking like my mother. And only when I realized that everything is subjective and relative. I don't have to look like my mother. I'm so okay looking like my father. I've got his IQ. My mother was very book smart, but my father was very entrepreneurial smart. So it's fine for me to be like my father. The minute I'm there, sadness goes back in the wings, out comes joy. Do you see how that works? You decide who's on stage with you by your mindset and what you say to yourself. And it's fabulous that we have that much control over that. So you can experience each emotion, get the information it's trying to give you. You know, sadness comes out, sadness would say, see, I told you. You don't look like your mother. It's really too bad. Your brother looks like your mother. He's really, really handsome. You know, too bad you don't look like that. Well, one of the things you can control is what you tell yourself. And so I say, yeah, he is good looking. And your point would be, I look like my dad. I'm really okay with that. Feelings are a horse of a different color and follow a totally different pathway through the brain. Now, go back to the prefrontal cortex. Remember I said that that part of the brain makes us uniquely human, and as far as we know, other mammals don't have the type of prefrontal cortex we do. When an emotion arises in your body and you get all of those physiological changes, your brain tries to make sense of what's happening. How come things have changed in the room? You know, the heat's changed, whatever. And it starts trying to figure that out. And the word feelings is the label for your brain's subjective interpretation of all of this stuff that changed in your body. It's that simple. That's the good news and the bad news. The bad news is if your brain creates feelings that aren't going to help you, you're going to get negative outcomes. The good news is if they create feelings that are positive, they will help you. So as soon as the brain comes up with a feeling, you have to decide if you want to hang on to it or if you want to change it. So fear comes out, and I'm scared that I don't look good enough even. I mean, what am I doing up here speaking in public if she thinks I need a facelift? But that's a feeling. It's just a feeling. Do I want to hang on to that or do I want to change it? And the minute you change the way you think, your feelings will change because feelings always follow thoughts. Got that memorized? Feelings always follow thoughts. You can change your thoughts, you can change your self-talk, that will change your feelings. It's just empowering to know that. So bottom line, read with me. You are not responsible for every emotion that surfaces, maybe due to your own thoughts, but maybe due to external triggers. Since your brain creates your feelings, your interpretation of what the emotion is trying to tell you, you are responsible for the feelings you hang on to over time. So if the emotion of anger comes out on the stage and you allow yourself to get really mad and you keep hanging on to those feelings of being mad, you're going to get negative outcomes over time. Because what's the only emotion that has no negative outcomes when maintained over time? Joy. If fear comes out and you hang on to being scared, you're going to get eventually negative outcomes. If sadness comes out and you hang on to the feelings of loss and talk about them and rehearse them and so on, you're going to hang on to the feelings of sadness. And the minute you change that, you will begin your climb back up to joy. Now, since we're doing male-female differences this week, here's a few male-female differences that I think are fascinating. They got something like 10,000 people together, half male, half female. They actually wired them up to biofeedback connectors that would automatically record their heartbeat rate, their blood pressure, their temperature, their rate of breathing, whether they were perspiring or not, all kinds of physiological changes. Then they were shown pictures designed first to elicit the emotion of anger. They showed them pictures where if you were looking at that, it would make you angry. It was so outrageous or so awful. Males And then they had this little monitor where you were to type in what you felt. What was it? And because we tend to use the emotions and feelings synonymously, which is unfortunate, they tried to change that. If the emotion of anger surfaced, you were to write in you were mad. If the emotion of fear surfaced, you would write in you're scared or afraid. If the emotion of sadness popped up, then you'd write down that you were bad sad, because couldn't figure out another synonym for sadness. So males universally recognized anger, not a problem. Males are socialized, it's okay for them to be angry. Women were unaware of their anger. Very few of them typed in, I'm mad. But when they showed them pictures designed to elicit sadness, we got a flip-flop. So the men didn't recognize sadness. They put in anger for everything. The women recognized sadness, but they put in sadness for everything. Instead of being angry or fearful, they put sad. And males, instead of being fearful or sad, put in anger for everything. Which leads researchers to believe that we really are socialized early in life. That it's okay for men to be angry, but not sad, and probably not fearful. Come on, you got to be macho. And for women, you can't be angry. Find someone to take care of you if you're fearful, but it's fine for you to be sad. And unfortunately, we even see that in little kindergarten kids. A little boy and a girl will fall down on the playground and they both get their knees skinned. And when I was school nurse, a teacher would run out, pick the little girl up. It's okay, honey, I know it hurts. It's fine for you to cry. Come on to the nurse's office, let's fix you up. Reinforcing that behavior. They'd look at the little boy and they'd go, hey, suck it up, son. You just got your knees scratched. That big boys don't cry. And already they're starting to get socialized for this dichotomy, which is unhelpful because all of us need all of those emotions to give us information. So the difference is when the males stop at anger, they lose the information that they need to manage fear and sadness. And so they may never, ever manage sadness well. And the research suggests that many males develop what we call a slush fund of unresolved loss. And because they don't deal well with sadness and they don't know how to grieve loss, this big slush fund is getting piled up in the brain. And then some little tiny thing might happen and they overreact. Not because of the little tiny thing, but because of the slush fund of unresolved grief. And women, they go clear to sadness, whether or not it was appropriate, but at least joy is right next to anger. They only got to go one step up to joy. But women, if they go to sadness and it's not appropriate, they have a lot farther to go to climb back up to joy. And some researchers believe that has something to do with the disparity of the numbers of women who are at sadness versus the numbers of men. And down at sadness, you don't get the energy or the insight to take care of yourself, either to protect yourself or to set your boundaries because they've been invaded. So can you see how we both, as men and women, experience different things that give us different consequences? Which is probably the reason that many couples break up after the death of a child. Because he goes to anger and wants to fix it. Because the male brain is a fix-it brain. But the kid's dead. There's nothing to fix. And when he can't go to sadness and recover, then he often leaves the environment that reminds him that he couldn't fix it. Have I said it in a way that makes sense? And he's got to understand that in a war zone you can't fix everything. But he's stuck at anger. She's down here at sadness. There's a wide disparity there. She can't understand why he's so mad. He can't understand why she's just sitting like a little lump in, the corner of the room, refusing to engage in life. And even if he didn't leave because the environment reminded him of something he couldn't fix, the disparity between how they're living lives is going to diverge them. And pretty soon they have nothing in common. So it's important that everybody goes to the appropriate step and they can help each other. Otherwise, there's no communication. So the bottom line is we're designed to live with joy. So we need to live there. And only go down the step as we need to, depending on what the bona fide situation in front of us requires. So somebody asked me the other day, well, let's suppose you're clear down at sadness. What do you do to jump back up to joy? And I said, well, there's no jumping up the stairs. Hate to tell you that. You have to go up the stairs one at a time to go back to joy, which is a problem for women if you're down at sadness and that's not the appropriate emotion. You got a long way to climb up. So how would you climb up? Well, you do it by talking yourself through it. So, for example, when I flew into Sydney, well, I wanted to fly into Sydney. When I left San Francisco to fly here on this trip, we got 7 hours out of San Francisco, and a woman on the plane, her heart stopped. And the crew worked really hard with the defibrillator and so on to get it started again, but the doctor who was a passenger on board deemed that she wouldn't make it, another 8 hours to Sydney, so we got diverted up and back a bit to Honolulu. Immediately when they told us we have anywhere between a 10 and 24-hour layover ahead of us, my brain immediately went to fear. Oh, I'm afraid I won't make it to speak in Sydney like I'm supposed to. What am I going to do? Am I going to email people and say, get somebody else to speak? What am I going to do? And I realized that fear is the appropriate emotion for a situation where I'm in danger of not being able to make an appointment that I've promised a year ago to make. However, staying down at fear is not going to be able to allow me to brainstorm. So I take a deep breath and say, what step am I on? I'm on fear. All right, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid I'm not going to get there to speak on time. Is there anything I can do about it? I don't know that yet. Maybe there is something I can do about it, but it is what it is right now, so I can either stay at fear and not brainstorm, or I can move on up. I think I'll move on up. So I take a deep breath and I move up to anger, and I say, so what am I angry about? Well, I'm angry that, not that the woman had the heart attack, although, it's too bad in this world people have heart attacks, but, I know the crew needs a break, but come on, we're the passengers. We're the reason they got a job. What's the deal here? Send in a new crew. Get us a new plane. Come on, I've paid lots of money to do this journey. And then I say to myself, well, am I going to be able to do anything about this? Probably not, and I'm kind of spinning my wheels here, aren't I? Okay, well, let's pop up to joy and see what I can brainstorm. So I take a deep breath and I go up to joy and I think, okay, what am I happy about? Well, I'm glad it wasn't me whose heart stopped. There's always a gift here, folks. Glad it wasn't me whose heart stopped. So I went up and talked to the attendants and they said, well, we don't have another plane. By law, the crew has to wait X number of hours. And I said, I'm supposed to be speaking tomorrow. Well, we regret that. I said, well, if you can think of any other option, let me know. Is there another United flight I can take? No, there's no other United flight. Is there any other company that flies from Honolulu to Sydney? Well, yes, there is Hawaiian Air. Can I get on Hawaiian Air? Well, we only have 80 empty seats, and there's 380 people on the United flight. And I said, well, what's going to happen to the 80 seats? Well, I guess the first 80 people who asked to have their ticket changed will get on. Well, I was so glad I wasn't down here at anger, fear, or sadness, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I took advantage of the fact that I have 2 artificial hips and can't walk that fast. I said, get me a wheelchair, get somebody to push me to Hawaiian Air. I got one of the last 3 tickets. It wouldn't have happened if I was down here. I would have been virtually immobile. So once you understand and talk yourself through it, it's just amazing what you can do. And it's pretty fabulous. All right, have you got the picture of emotions and feelings, how different they are, and what they're given to us to help us do? Question. Good question. Is love an emotion? We do not believe love is an emotion. Love is a principle. You choose it. And people who don't understand that have difficulty with unconditional long-term love because they are going on the emotion of euphoria. And we could spend a whole morning talking about the tsunami of hormones in romantic love. But we believe it is a principle that you choose to do, which is kind of nice because you're not at the whim of your emotions and feelings. Although, when you are making decisions about who to love long term, it can be really helpful to be able to pay attention to your emotions because they will give you impressions about how safe this is or how desirable this is and what kind of life you might have, and is this person who you want to be the parent of your child? And when you're involved in this hormonal tsunami, you're not thinking those kind of thoughts. So emotions and feelings can help you immensely if you know how to use them. All right, now I'd like you to get up and move around. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll do part 2 of emotional intelligence.